Yes, Britain has to have a policy which supports human rights in Saudi Arabia and could easily afford to do so. There's a recent report by two academics at King's College London which found that there is little evidence that the British government exerts any influence or leverage over Saudi Arabia. And actually it found the opposite. There's more evidence that Saudi Arabia exerts influence over the British government. But that simply shouldn't be the case. The truth is that Saudi Arabia relies on the UK far more than the other way around. That's been the situation since Britain helped found the Saudi state at the start of the 20th century. But it's now based mostly on arms sales and military support. And that military support is critical for Saudi Arabia. British service personnel train and advise the Saudi military. They run the Saudi military bases and they help the Saudi military operate and use the equipment that it buys. There are over 7,000 British military and civilian personnel actually based in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Air Force pilots go and train at RAF bases in the UK. Saudi princes go to Sandhurst. And it's widely recognised that if the UK pulled all of this support, then the entirety of the Saudi Royal Air Force would be grounded within 7 to 14 days. They couldn't fly their planes without us. There wouldn't be any planes in the sky. And bearing in mind that these are the same planes that are flying over into Yemen and dropping bombs. So there's just no way that Saudi Arabia could afford to lose this support, especially in a region where it, at least as it sees it, it faces an existential threat from its powerful, larger, and increasingly aggressive archenemy, Iran. So the British government effectively props up the Saudi regime and has done for many years. And what does the UK get in return? Well, certainly Saudi Arabia are the biggest customer of arms, accounting for around 50%. But this should not be overstated. The arms industry is a small part of the UK economy. In 2016, it accounted for only around 0.2% of our total export value. And certainly there are communities and jobs which rely on the arms trade. And it's important that those are protected or at least supported in some way. But actually only a third of those jobs relate to arms exports, as opposed to arms that are manufactured and produced for the MOD, so for the British Armed Forces, for our country. And aside from arms, Saudi Arabia is not in any way, shape or form a key trading partner for the UK. In 2016, Saudi Arabia accounted for just 1% of the total value of UK exports, and we import even fewer goods from Saudi Arabia. Goods from Saudi Arabia account for just 0.3% or so of our total imports. There's a common misconception that we rely on Saudi Arabia for oil, but that's just not true. Even though Saudi Arabia is the world's #1 oil producer, we're not really buying it. The UK government gets most of its oil from Norway, which accounts for, in 2016, accounted for around 70%, whereas imports of oil from Saudi Arabia accounted for just just around 3%. So in terms of economics and trade, we don't get much from Saudi Arabia at all. The other justification or excuse that is given for our close relationship with Saudi Arabia is we rely heavily on it for critical intelligence, apparently. And this is a line currently run by the British government. Just last year, Jeremy Hunt said that Saudi intelligence stops bombs going off on the streets of Britain. But there's so much uncertainty and a serious lack of evidence around this that we should be asking pretty critical questions. Where is Saudi Arabia getting this intelligence from? Is it from terrorist cells or terrorist organizations actually within Saudi Arabia? or elsewhere? And would Saudi Arabia really withhold that critical intelligence from the UK if the government was criticising its human rights abuses? If so, is this country really our ally? So coming back to your original question, yes, the UK government could easily take a much tougher, a much more robust approach to human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia. And the reason why that hasn't happened so far, make no mistake about it, is because of a lack of political will. And our hope at the Labour Campaign for Human Rights is that the next Labour government wouldn't be so soft.